The question wasn't shouted. It wasn't even said with anger. But when it finally came, hours later, it would hit the judge like a sledgehammer to the ego. But let's rewind. It was a hot summer morning in a sleepy little town, the kind where the courthouse sat right on Main Street between the bakery and the post office. The air outside shimmered with heat, and the cicadas screamed from the trees. Inside the courthouse, the air conditioner rattled against the window, pushing out just enough cool air to keep the room tolerable. Marcus Williams stepped through the door, his polished black shoes clicking against the worn wooden floor. He was neatly dressed in a dark gray suit, the kind that said he was a man who respected the occasion. He didn't fidget. He didn't look nervous. But he also wasn't there for a good reason. In front of him, on a slightly raised platform, sat Judge Robert Hensley, a heavy-set man with silver hair and a permanent frown carved into his face. His desk was stacked with papers, coffee stains on the edges, and an American flag drooped behind him. Marcus had been summoned over what the ticket claimed was a rolling stop, failing to fully stop at a stop sign. A minor thing. Normally, in cases like this, you walk in, explain yourself, maybe pay a $100 or $200 fine, and walk out. In fact, most people expected the judge to simply ask if you wanted to contest it or pay up. But the second Marcus stepped forward, the atmosphere shifted. The judge didn't look at the case file first. He looked at Marcus. His eyes scanned him from head to toe, pausing just long enough to make it uncomfortable. The corners of his mouth twitched, not in a smile, but in something closer to disapproval. "Name," the judge barked. "Marcus Williams," he replied. "Occupation?" "I work for the federal government," Marcus said, keeping his tone even. The judge leaned back in his chair, squinting. "Federal government, huh? And yet you can't follow a simple stop sign." A small murmur passed through the courtroom. A couple of people waiting for their own cases shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't the kind of question you'd expect in a traffic hearing. It sounded more like a personal jab. Marcus, keeping his composure, calmly explained that he had in fact stopped at the sign and that perhaps the officer had mistaken the situation. But the judge cut him off mid-sentence. "Do you really expect me to believe that?" Hensley asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. And just like that, the mask was off. This wasn't going to be a simple hearing. This was about something else entirely. Marcus could feel it. It wasn't just about the law. It was about him. About the fact that he was a young black man standing in front of a judge who clearly didn't think much of him. And the thing about Judge Hensley? People in town whispered he was old school, and not in a good way. He'd been on the bench for decades, and while some saw him as a strict man who kept order, others saw him as someone who carried a chip on his shoulder and wasn't afraid to show his biases. The questions kept coming, each one sounding less like legal procedure and more like a cross-examination of Marcus's right to even be there. "Where are you from?" the judge asked sharply, as if Marcus's birthplace had anything to do with the case. "Do you drive through this town often?" And then came the smirk, a slow, deliberate curl of the lips as Judge Hensley picked up his pen. "Well," he said, drawing out the word, "I think a lesson needs to be learned here." The gavel didn't even fall before Marcus realized what was happening. The fine the judge announced was triple the normal amount for such an offense. Nearly $900 for what should have been a $250 ticket. A hush fell over the room. The clerk hesitated for a split second before typing the number into the record. A woman in the back gasped quietly. Marcus said nothing. Not yet. He simply nodded, his face calm, even as he folded the paperwork in his hand. There would be time for words later. And when they came, they would change everything. Judge Robert Hensley had been sitting on that bench for over 20 years. To some in this small town, he was a symbol of law and order. But to others, especially those who didn't look like him, he was a storm cloud in a black robe. People in the community knew his type. The kind of man who believed respect wasn't something mutual, but something demanded. He didn't hide his biases. In fact, some swore he wore them like a badge. They'd seen him go softer on certain defendants and harder on others, with no legal reason for the difference. And that morning, Marcus Williams was about to feel exactly what that meant. The judge leaned forward in his chair, looking at Marcus the way a cat looks at a bird. Not with curiosity, but with a kind of cold calculation. "Where are you really from?" he asked again, this time slower, emphasizing the word really. Marcus kept his tone calm. "I'm from D.C. I live there now." The judge's eyebrow twitched. "Ah, big city man. And what exactly do you do for the federal government?" The way he said federal government made it sound less like a career and more like a punchline. "I work in the legal field," Marcus replied, deliberately vague. He wasn't lying, but he wasn't giving away everything either. Instead of focusing on the actual traffic violation, Judge Hensley began circling around Marcus with his words, asking questions that had nothing to do with the stop sign at all. "How often do you pass through here? Do you always drive this type of car? Did you think the rules in our town don't apply to you?" It was interrogation disguised as small talk, but the undertone was clear. The judge wasn't trying to understand the facts. He was trying to establish dominance. Finally, after nearly 15 minutes of back and forth, Judge Hensley sighed heavily and picked up his pen. "You know," he said, "around here, we believe in teaching people a lesson, especially those who think they're above the law." The words hung in the air like a warning shot. Marcus had been to dozens of courtrooms in his career. He'd seen judges uphold fairness with quiet dignity, and he'd seen others let their personal opinions creep into their rulings. But in that moment, he knew exactly which kind of Judge Hensley was. The fine came next, not $250, which was the standard penalty for a rolling stop in that county. Not even $400, which might have been steep but believable. No. Judge Hensley leaned back, looked straight at Marcus, and announced, $900, payable within 30 days. No exceptions. The words hit like a hammer. Triple the normal amount. Completely unjustified. Even the court clerk looked surprised, her fingers pausing over the keyboard for a split second before entering the number into the system. In the benches behind Marcus, a few people shifted uncomfortably. A woman whispered to her husband, "That's ridiculous." But no one dared say it too loudly. In this courtroom, the judge's word was final. Hensley scribbled something on the paperwork, then slid it toward the clerk. "Next case," he barked, already moving on as if the decision was as ordinary as handing out a parking ticket. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't protest. He didn't even sigh. He simply reached for the papers, folded them neatly, and placed them inside his briefcase. His face was unreadable, a mask of calm. But inside, his mind was already working. Years in the legal world had taught him one thing. Sometimes, the smartest move isn't to fight right. They're in the heat of the moment. Sometimes it's to let the other person dig their own hole, and then let the law do the digging for you. The judge thought he'd just taught a lesson, but in reality, he had just set the stage for his own downfall. After the gavel came down and the excessive fine was slammed onto Marcus Williams, the room remained tense. For a moment, the courtroom seemed frozen in time, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. Marcus didn't say a word. He didn't argue. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he quietly nodded and asked, "May I have a written record of today's proceedings?" The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Why?" he asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. Marcus's reply was calm but firm. "I like to keep things official." To everyone else, it might have seemed like a simple request. But to Marcus, it was the first step in a carefully planned strategy. Because what Judge Hensley didn't know, what nobody in that small courtroom knew, was that Marcus Williams wasn't just an ordinary driver or a random citizen. Marcus was a federal prosecutor, a man who spent his days defending the law, prosecuting cases in federal courts, and ensuring justice was served, no matter how powerful the opponent. He was a man trained to recognize injustice when he saw it, and he had just been handed a blatant example of it. Marcus understood the value of patience. He knew that reacting with anger or defiance in that moment would only play into the judge's hands, giving him the excuse to treat him even worse. So, instead, Marcus chose a different path, the path of quiet strength and calculated action. Over the next few days, Marcus carefully reviewed the court transcripts and the fine's details. He consulted with colleagues in the legal world, ensuring every word and every action taken by Judge Hensley was documented and ready for scrutiny. But Marcus also knew that this wasn't just about him. This was about a system that sometimes allowed bias and prejudice to creep into the very institutions meant to protect fairness and equality. It was about shining a light on those dark corners of power where injustice hides. In the background, Judge Hensley went about his usual business, unaware that his courtroom conduct was being carefully examined. He probably thought Marcus would just pay the fine and move on, like so many others had before. But Marcus had other plans. He filed a formal complaint with the Federal Judiciary Oversight Committee, detailing the judge's behavior, the excessive fine, and the racially charged remarks that had been exchanged during the hearing. Because when the scales of justice are unbalanced, sometimes it takes someone on the inside, someone who understands the system deeply, to set them right. Meanwhile, the local community buzzed quietly with whispers. Some people sympathized with Marcus, recognizing the unfair treatment. Others, wary of rocking the boat, said nothing. Marcus stayed focused, preparing to let the truth speak for itself. Weeks passed, and then the moment arrived. Judge Hensley received an official letter from the Department of Justice, a letter he couldn't ignore. The letter informed him of the complaint lodged against him and announced an investigation into his courtroom conduct. Suddenly, the man who had wielded his power so confidently was on the receiving end of scrutiny. Judge Hensley, who had thought Marcus just another defendant, now faced questions about his own behavior. The arrogance that once filled his courtroom began to crumble under the weight of accountability. For Marcus, it wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about making sure that justice was truly blind, that it wasn't swayed by race, position, or prejudice. He believed in the system, even if the system sometimes failed, and he trusted that when the facts were laid bare, the truth would prevail. This was the calm before the storm, the moment when quiet courage set the stage for a reckoning. Marcus knew that the fight wasn't over, not yet, but he was ready, because sometimes the most powerful weapon in the face of injustice isn't anger or shouting. It's patience, preparation, and the unwavering belief that the law will win, if only it is given the chance. Weeks passed after the courtroom incident, but the impact of that day was only beginning to unfold. What seemed like a routine traffic case had quietly ignited something far bigger, a spotlight on a judge who had overstepped his role and exposed his own prejudices. Judge Robert Hensley, confident in his authority, went on with his daily courtroom duties, unaware that the calm surface he expected to remain undisturbed was about to crack wide open. It started when an official letter arrived at his chambers, crisp, formal, and unmistakably serious. The Department of Justice was investigating the complaint filed against him. For Hensley, this was unexpected. He had likely assumed that Marcus Williams would pay the fine quietly and disappear, just like countless others before him. Instead, Marcus's complaint carried the weight of his position as a federal prosecutor, a man well-versed in the law and its procedures. The investigation wasn't a mere formality. It was thorough, detailed, and unrelenting. The review panel requested the complete transcript from the traffic hearing, the audio recordings, and sworn statement from the court clerk and others present that day. Listening to the recording of the hearing was like watching a slow-motion replay of the very moment Hensley's power slipped through his fingers. The tone of the judge's questions, the dismissive smirk when Marcus explained his side, and the glaringly excessive fine all painted a clear picture of bias. It was not just an error in judgment. It was a violation of the very principles Hensley was sworn to uphold. The investigators found several points where Hensley's conduct breached judicial ethics. His comments strayed from the legal facts and veered into personal territory, questioning Marcus's background and implying that he wasn't worthy of the court's fairness. This kind of behavior couldn't be ignored, especially when it came from someone entrusted with interpreting and applying the law. As the investigation proceeded, Judge Hensley's courtroom demeanor began to change. Word spread quietly but quickly among local attorneys and court staff. The judge was facing serious scrutiny. Some noticed his usual swagger was gone, replaced by a more cautious, almost defensive air. The news even reached local media outlets, which began reporting on the rare federal inquiry into a local judge's conduct. For the small town, It was like watching a slow-motion fall from grace, a reminder that no one, not even a judge, was above the law. Meanwhile, Marcus Williams remained mostly out of the spotlight. He didn't seek attention or media coverage. His focus was on the facts, on the evidence, and on ensuring that justice was done, not just for himself, but for everyone who might face similar treatment in that courtroom. His calm and professional approach won respect from many who followed the case. He didn't just stand up for himself, said one legal expert. He stood up for the integrity of the entire judicial system. Finally, after months of review, the Department of Justice issued a formal ruling. The excessive fine against Marcus was rescinded and his record cleared. More importantly, Judge Hensley was officially reprimanded. He was ordered to undergo mandatory ethics training and was temporarily suspended from presiding over cases, a rare and public mark against his long career. It was a blow to his reputation, a reminder that the power of the bench comes with responsibility, a responsibility to be impartial, fair, and just. For Marcus, the outcome was bittersweet. He didn't celebrate the judge's punishment. Rather, he saw it as a necessary correction in a flawed system. This isn't about revenge, Marcus said in an interview afterward. It's about accountability. We have to trust the courts to be fair, and when they're not, we have to speak up. Otherwise, injustice wins. The story of Marcus Williams and Judge Hensley quickly became a powerful example, a reminder that courage and truth can prevail even when the odds seem stacked against you. It showed that sometimes the most important victories happen not in the heat of battle, but in the quiet moments that follow, when the law finally catches up with those who try to bend it. And it sent a clear message to judges everywhere. Fairness isn't optional. It's mandatory. The courtroom drama between Marcus Williams and Judge Robert Hensley didn't just end with a fine or an official reprimand. It became a catalyst, a story that rippled far beyond the small town where it all began, sparking conversations about fairness, bias, and the true meaning of justice. After the Department of Justice's ruling cleared Marcus's name and sanctioned the judge, something shifted, not just in the local courthouse, but in the hearts and minds of those who had followed the story. Marcus, a federal prosecutor, had faced down a system stacked against him in a courtroom where he was supposed to be just another citizen. Instead, he emerged not only vindicated, but as a symbol of resilience and integrity. His calm, unwavering faith in the law showed that justice is possible, even when the odds seem impossible. But this story is about much more than one man or one judge. It's about the countless people who every day walk into courts across the country, hoping for fairness, but sometimes meeting prejudice. It's about the power of the law when wielded with honesty, and the damage it can cause when used to enforce bias. Marcus's experience revealed a hard truth, that judges, like all of us, carry their own beliefs and biases. Some hide them better than others. But when those biases affect the lives of others, they must be held accountable. What made Marcus's case stand out was his decision to use the very system that had been used against him to demand fairness. His position as a federal prosecutor gave him knowledge and tools, but his courage came from something deeper, a belief that justice isn't just a word, it's a promise. The public response to the story was overwhelming. Videos and articles about Marcus's case spread quickly online. People saw in him a reminder that the fight for equality and justice is ongoing, and that silence in the face of unfairness only allows it to continue. In interviews, Marcus remained humble. He often said that the spotlight wasn't on him, but on the need for a better system. "I'm not special," he explained. "I just refuse to accept unfair treatment. If we all stood up like this, maybe we'd have fewer stories like mine." His words resonated deeply, especially in a time when many were questioning the fairness of the justice system. On the other side, Judge Hensley's career was forever changed. The suspension and ethics training were just the beginning. The case prompted a broader review of his rulings, revealing a pattern of questionable decisions and bias. Eventually, he retired earlier than planned, his reputation tarnished. The courthouse community also began to reflect. Some of Hensley's colleagues acknowledged the problem of implicit bias in their own ranks. The local judicial system implemented new training programs focused on fairness, diversity, and cultural sensitivity, small but important steps toward reform. Marcus himself became a quiet advocate for change. Though he continued his demanding work as a federal prosecutor, he also spoke at legal conferences, community events, and schools, sharing his story to inspire others to stand up against injustice. His message was clear: the law is not just a set of rules. It's a living promise that belongs to everyone. For many viewers watching this story unfold, it was a call to action. It reminded them to question unfair treatment, to demand accountability, and to believe that change is possible. In the end, the story of Marcus Williams and Judge Robert Hensley shows us something powerful. Justice isn't a guarantee, it's a responsibility. It's the responsibility of those who enforce the law to be fair. It's the responsibility of those who experience injustice to speak out. And it's the responsibility of all of us to listen, to learn, and to keep pushing for a system that truly works for everyone. As Marcus once said in an interview, we have to trust the law, but we also have to hold it accountable. This story isn't just a moment in time. It's a reminder that justice is a journey, not a destination. And every one of us has a part to play. So the next time you hear about a case like Marcus's, remember this. Behind every fine, every ruling, every decision, there's a person, and their dignity matters. Stand up for fairness. Demand accountability. Believe in the power of truth. Because that's how justice wins.